Alright, so let's get started with our video lecture on the Atlantic revolutions. We're going to go back to Latin America, to the Caribbean, to an island called Hispaniola. Now, Hispaniola is the home of two countries, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But back then, it was known as either Saint Dominique or Dominique or Santo Domingo, depending whether you're French or you're Spanish. And that is the place where the Haitian Revolution is going to take place. So Saint Dominique, half of the island, was a French colony. And it had this huge, massive slave population. 90% of the people were slaves. And it was the money maker for France, right? France earned tons of money from production of sugar and coffee, which are the two major cash crops there. So France was making big time money. So this was kind of like France's one of the last few colonies France had in the Americas. So France was really like strict with this colony. Therefore, we see a lot of mercantilism take place, where the French have very tight control over, the exports and the imports out of Haiti. So within the island, right, within the French colonies, there is going to be a division, because there's going to be rich French colonists who are the slave owners and the plantation owners who are making big time money, and of course they're going to be running the colony, right? They're the leaders of the colony. But there's also poor French colonists, white colonists, living in Haiti, and they're not going to be reaping the benefits. So within the white French colonist population, there's a division between the rich and the poor. There's also a group called the gens de couleur, or the gentlemen of color, which are the mulattoes. So within, so you have the whites, rich versus poor. You have the mulattoes there. They're not slaves. They're not free. They're not, white, but they're kind of like in the middle. So, and they want more rights and more opportunities. And then, of course, you have the huge slave population who wants to be free. So all these different forces, the whites, the mulattoes, the poor, right? They're going to start fighting against each other. There's going to be this big civil war, basically. And while they're fighting against each other, there is going to break out a rebellion, a slave revolt, right? And the leader of this slave rebellion is a former slave, an educated former slave, right? He taught himself to read and write. And of course, he's going to read and write about Enlightenment ideas, right? Ideas, in the American, Declaration of Independence, and in the Declaration of Rights of, man and citizen in France. And this guy's name is Toussaint L'ouverture, right? And he's going to lead an army, a slave rebellion, and they're going to basically massacre. They're going to kill all the slave owners, right? They're the number one target. And Napoleon sends an army to kind of reestablish control. And then the British get involved and the Spanish get involved. It gets complicated, but the end result is that they overthrow the French colonial power. They kill the upper class white plantation owners, and Haiti becomes a republic, a constitutional republic. In fact, it becomes the second oldest constitutional republic in the Americas, in the Western Hemisphere. The first one being, of course, the United States. So what we see is that the Enlightenment ideas, right, isn't just in Europe or in the United States, but it's also in Latin America, and it's also in Haiti, and it's also among slaves. Right? These people, people like Toussaint L'ouverture, read about rights and freedoms and liberty and all men are created equal, and then they're like, if it applies to the United States and if it applies to the citizens of France, why can't it apply to slaves in Haiti? And so we see a lot of inspiration from the French and the American revolutions make their way into Haiti. Now, L'ouverture, even though he's the leader of the revolution, eventually he gets captured and he dies in a French prison. And the reason why the Haitians, by the way, they renamed Saint Dominique Haiti, which is it means like a mountainous place. That's like what it translates to. But the Haitians, towards the end of the revolution, they didn't really care for L'ouverture, because what he wanted to do was he wanted the slaves to continue working on sugar plantations, which is extremely difficult work, right? Which is, of course, why they use slaves. And the former slaves who are now free, they don't want to work on plantations. They don't want to grow sugar. They just want to like live their own lives, have their own little farms, and kind of go back to trying to live a more simple life, I guess. And the result is that Haiti's economy collapses, right? They don't trade. They stop growing cash crops. Instead, the farms are divided, the land is divided amongst the farmers, and the farmers go and they grow crops to eat and survive and subsist on. So even though this becomes an independent country and becomes a republic and overthrows the French and ends slavery, because they're the first revolution to actually end slavery. In the long run, Haiti still becomes a poor country. In fact, it's considered one of the poorest countries, or not the poorest country, in the Americas. And again, it is because they turn to this isolation, economy, a more self-subsistent economy, where they're not going to trade at all. So L'ouverture's, victory was very successful, and this was a radical revolution, right? This was the definition of a radical revolution. The American Revolution benefited the upper class, white men, right? And the French Revolution really benefited the bourgeoisie, and at least immediately. But the Haitian Revolution really benefited everyone, upper class, middle class, lower class, especially the slaves, right? 90% of the population, right? Because they're going to abolish slavery. They're going to be the first country to abolish slavery in the early modern era, or in the modern era, I should say. And however, as progressive and radical as this was, they don't give women any rights. Right? Women are still considered second class, right, below the men. So the Haitian Revolution is a remarkable event, completely radical, completely different than the other revolutions. All right, so that's it for part number 5. I'll see you next time.